ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا وسندنا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله. قال الله تعالى في القرآن المجيد والفرقان الحميد: كتب عليكم الصيام. وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم: لكل شيء باب وباب العبادة الصوم. Respected listeners, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, we had 5 lectures on Imam Ghazali's rahmatullah alayhi's al-muhlakat, or those things that destroy a person spiritually. There's 10 that he's listed in his book Al-Arba'in fi Usul al-Din, the 40 Principles of Religion, which is a summary or a condensed version of his great magnum opus Ihya al-Din, the revival of the Islamic sciences. There's a request last week that we do a final one further lesson in the first, within the first 7 days of Ramadan, and hence we introduce this further lesson. But I said we won't speak about the annihilators. We'll speak about something else that's probably more suitable for the holy month of Ramadan. So the topic today is actually going to be about fasting and the secrets of fasting according to Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi. He's got a few pages, very easy. I'll summarize it for you and I shall run through that very quickly. So as I said before, the Ihya al-Din is divided into 4 parts, which he calls the rubs or the quarters. The first 10 principles is around aqidah and beliefs. The second 10 principles is regarding the a'mal al-zahira, the external actions of the limbs. Then the third is the muhlikat, the annihilators. We've covered 4 of them I think so far. And then the last 10 principles are the akhlaq al-mahmuda, the positive character traits that a person should try and inculcate within themselves. Now, when I look at the 40, and you look at it in each of the quarter, the second quarter is amal al-zahira, the outer external limbs, and the second principle within that is as-siyam, which is fasting. So I'll just put a context there for you. What we're going to cover today, very simple. We're going to cover a few hadiths that Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi mentions. He also explains why fasting is special in the eyes of Allah Almighty within the context of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The third thing is he's going to be speaking about how much should a person fast. Obviously we're fasting in Ramadan, but fasting throughout the year in general, because this chapter hasn't been specifically put together regarding fasting in Ramadan. It's about fasting in general, but it's suitable for the context of fasting in Ramadan. So how much should you fast during the year? So he explains that, and then after that he also goes into levels of fasting, the inner secret of fasting. How should our fasting actually be? And then lastly, he has a short conclusion. And so it's very, very simple. I'm just going to go over that very quickly. So the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says in the hadith, يقول الله سبحانه وتعالى, Allah Almighty, he says, and this is a hadith al-Qudsi. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam narrating the hadith, but he's narrating what Allah Almighty says. كل حسنة بعشر أمثالها, that every good deed is multiplied by 10. إلى 700 ضعف, to around 700. إلا الصيام, except for fasting. Right, so every action has a reward except for fasting. فإنه لي وأنا أجزي به, for indeed Allah Almighty says it's for me, and the fasting is being carried out for me. وأنا أجزي به, and I actually give its reward. وقال صلى الله عليه وسلم, the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, لكل شيء باب, that everything has a door, a gateway. Yeah, everything has a gateway, an opening. وَبَابُ الْعِبَادَةِ الصَّوْمِ, and the door of worship is fasting. The question is, why is fasting so special? Why is it that Allah Almighty for salah, for zakat, for hajj, everyone gets the reward? But then why does he specifically specify fasting? وَأَنَا أَجْزِي بِهِ, that I shall give its reward. The ulama mentioned, Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi mentions, that the reason why fasting is special is for 2 reasons. Number 1, it's an act of abstention. So you're withholding yourself. Yeah? So Allah Almighty actually recognizes this. That's number 1. وَهُوَ عَمَلٌ سِرِّي, and at the same time it's also a secret hidden action that person carries out. لا يطلع عليه غير الله تعالى إلا كالصلاة والزكاة وغيرهما. And he says that it's a secret action that person does. If I'm fasting, nobody around me knows that I'm fasting. We know it's Ramadan. If you're fasting outside Ramadan, nobody knows. And even in Ramadan, other people who aren't from our faith won't necessarily recognize that you're actually fasting. So لا يطلع عليه غير الله. No one aside from Allah Almighty actually knows about it. And it's not like prayer or zakat or hajj, etc. Other people can see you carrying out the actions. This is a secret action it's a pious deed that you're carrying out internally. Nobody knows about it. So hence, because of that, Allah Almighty grants the reward specifically himself. The other thing that he mentions is أنه قهر لعدو الله فإن الشيطان هو العدو. That it's a victory over the enemies of Allah Almighty. Yeah, and the enemy of Allah Almighty is shaitan. Because you're breaking the nafs and you're confining shaitan to a very menial role. He's been reduced in what he can do. وَلَنْ يَقْبَلْ الْعَدُوُّ إِلَّا بِوَاسِ شَهَوَاتِ. He says that, shaitan, he actually thrives off a person's shahawat, his carnal desires, the base desires inside them. وَالْجَوْ يَكْسِرُ جَمِيعَ الشَّهَوَاتِ. And the fact is that hunger breaks all of the carnal desires, الَّتِي هِيَ آلَةُ الشَّيْطَانِ, which are the tools that shaitan uses in order to lead us astray. And that's why we fast. Why? To get control over our nafs, our carnal desires. If you can control your nafs, your iman in Islam will be perfect, inshallah. But it has to be controlled. وَلِذَلِكَ قال صلى الله عليه وسلم إن الشيطان ليجري من ابن آدم مجرى الدم فضيقوا مجاريه بالجوع. And then he supports this with a hadith of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم in which he says, indeed, that Satan ليجري, he flows within the son of Adam عليه السلام مجرى الدم, in his veins and his arteries, the places where his heart, where his blood flows. فضيقوا مجاريه بالجوع, then constrain the places where he flows with hunger. Yeah, so that Nabi Ghazali said this. And it's also the secret behind the Prophet saying, إِذَا دَخَلَ رَمَضَانَ فُتِحَتْ أَبْوَابُ الْجِنَانِ وَغُلِّقَتْ أَبْوَابُ النِّيرَانِ وَضُفِّدَتْ الشَّيَاطِينِ وَنَادَى مُنَادٍ يَا بَاغِيَ الْخَيْرِ هَلُمَّ وَيَا بَاغِيَ الشَّرِّ أَقْصِرْ. And that's why Allah Almighty is, Nabi Karim the Prophet he says, when Ramadan enters, the doors of Jannah are opened. The doors of Jannah are opened. And the doors of the fire are closed. Yeah? And the shayateen are entrapped, or they're encaged or locked up. And the caller calls out, Ya Baghi al-Khair, O he who searches for goodness, Halumma, come. Ya Baghi al-Shar, and the person who seeks evil, let him go back, let him return back, let him push back. So Ramadan is a very auspicious month. Shaitan is put into jail, but then we have a habit of carrying out bad deeds still. Why? Because it's become our habit. But if you just focus our mind towards something positive and try to bring the spirit of the spirituality of Ramadan into our lives. For just 1 month, the Mashaykh, they mentioned that bringing the spirituality of Ramadan into your life and performing the fast in the correct way could lead to the next 11 months, inshallah ta'ala, becoming extremely pious and a change in our lives. Why not? It's dead easy. It's not difficult. It just needs a bit of focus, and it needs a bit of focus. And we also need to remain focused and reminding ourselves on a constant basis that how am I going to make my Ramadan better? And if one person slips, and it happens sometimes, then you just go move on, carry on, get back up. Then Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi mentions that level, that fasting, when it comes to fasting itself in general, not just Ramadan, outside Ramadan, in terms of its amount, how much should you fast throughout the year? There's 3 levels. He also mentions that according to the inner secret of fasting, the spirituality of fasting, there's also 3 levels. And he goes and describes all of these one by one. So we'll go over the first part, which is how much should you fast in a year? So they say that the lowest level of fasting is fasting in Ramadan only. The lowest level of fasting is fasting in Ramadan only. But the highest level, Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi says, the highest level of fasting is the fasting of Dawood alayhi salam, yeah, which is fasting one day and not fasting one day. Yeah, so you eat one day and you fast another, alternating. And then he mentions that according to the hadith related by Imam Bukhari, Imam Muslim, Ibn Hibban, Abu Dawud, fasting like this is superior to the Sawm of Dahar. Yeah, so he goes into a bit of a discussion here. He says that fasting one day and not fasting another day is better than fasting continuously throughout the year. Because some people have that habit, Sawm of Dahar, fasting throughout every day of the year. He also says that the hadith mentioned that fasting like this, and fasting one day, missing a day, fasting another day, missing a day, is the best type of fasting. And the reason behind this, the secret behind this, according to Ghazali, is that the person who fasts like this, when he continuously fasts throughout the year, their fasting becomes his habit. And when it becomes his habit, then three things happen. Number one, his nafs becomes used to it, so he's not really restricting his nafs. And the point of fasting is to punish the nafs and to make it subservient to our sharia and our intellect, not us being overpowered by our nafs. So if you're continuously fasting throughout the year, your nafs becomes used to it. Whereas the reason why we bring fasting is in order to bring it under control. It's like a high school where the teachers give detentions willy-nilly. Yeah? There's a school that does that. I won't mention which one. There's a school that does it. Now every time I get a text message from the school saying my son's got a detention, I don't even bother looking at the text message. Yeah? I've become indifferent to it. Why? Because the penal system is there for a reason. It's there to keep people in check. But overusing the penal system, well, people become complacent. And when people become complacent, then complacency breeds mediocrity. Yeah? You become mediocre in the way you behave and the way you deal with things. So the fact is that when it comes to fasting, so I'll just quickly go back a little bit because we've got some more guests that have attended, which they're welcome to attend. So it might be an idea if I just go back a little bit. Do you mind if I go back a little bit? Sure. Sisters? Okay. If I just go back a little bit, so the lesson today is all about fasting. And we mentioned a couple of hadiths. Rasulullah mentions fasting. And then we went into the reason behind why fasting is special in the eyes of Allah Almighty, because it's a private matter. A person around you, people around you will not know that you're fasting. Hence Allah Almighty's Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says, Allah says in the Hadith al-Qudsi that fasting is for me and I shall reward the person for fasting. Then we also mentioned that the reason why fasting is so special because it's a tool in order for us to compress or to tackle or to bring under control the enemy of Allah Almighty, which is shaitan. And shaitan is actually powerful because the tools that he uses in order to lead a person astray is his own carnal self, and fasting restricts that. And then we mentioned that fasting is of 3 levels in terms of amount, and it's also 3 levels in terms of spirituality, and that's where we came up to. So the first level is fasting, the lowest level is just fasting in Ramadan, and that's the lowest level of fasting according to Imam Ghazali. The second level is to fast one day and miss one day. To fast one day and miss one day. And we've talked about the first, and Imam Ghazali says that person shouldn't fast every day. Why? Because his nafs becomes used to fasting every day. And the idea of fasting is to break the nafs. So that's the first thing. The second thing he says is that when a person fasts every day, then his heart will not become as pure and as clear as it would if he fasted infrequently. Yeah? And the third thing is that when a person fasts one day, doesn't fast another day, his shahwat will become, his carnal self and his carnal desires will become weak. And then he explains it by saying here, he says, Wa'alam, he said the soul only takes impact from that which is thrust on it, not by that which is conditioned to withhold. Yeah? That the nafs itself is only, it takes impact, it's only affected by that which is thrown onto it, not by that which is conditioned to withhold. And this principle is not far-fetched. And he gives the example of physicians or doctors. They also forbid habitual consumption of medicine like paracetamol, or the recent thing, which is like antibiotics. If you've got an infection, they tell you, the doctor will give you, they tell you just weather it out. Why? Because by over prescribing, I'm not a physician, but by over prescribing antibiotics, you're actually making people immune from the effects of antibiotics. Is that right, Afuz? I think you're a medical student, yeah? Yeah, something like that. So I've read that, and I mean, I had an ear infection last week. I went to a doctor on Monday, and they wouldn't give me anything last Monday. And they said to me, well, we'll wait till Friday, and if it clears up by Friday, you don't need it. If it doesn't clear up, then we'll give you antibiotics. I said, okay, that's fine. But this is one of the things that they do. So the physicians also forbid habitual consumption of medicine and say that the person who makes this a habit, then he shall not benefit him when he falls ill, because his body becomes used to it. Hence, he does not have an impact. And you see this in other things. So, for example, going to the gym, you do cardio. You lose initially, if you're overweight, then you shred the pounds. I think, yeah. Well, I remember. Yeah, you shred the pounds. And then, if you carry on with the same theme, or if you carry on with the same exercises, the same amount, what happens after a bit? Your body becomes used to it, and then you don't lose the pounds as quickly as you want them to. You want to. So then what you got to do is you got to play around with your body a little bit by changing your exercises, the frequency, the intensity. You bring in interval training. You might want to change the machines. And in bodybuilding is the same thing. You do one exercise and you got to move things around. You got to have a bit of a rotation. Why? Because the body becomes used to it. When the body becomes used to it, then the impact doesn't happen. So likewise, if you're going to fast continuously throughout the year, mashallah, you're doing a very worshipful act. It's absolutely brilliant what you're doing. However, the secret behind the fasting is to break the carnal self. But then you're actually, you just change your meal times in a way that you become used to not eating. And therefore your carnal self isn't going to be put under effect. And then he explains this, he says, very nice, he says that pay attention and know that the medicine of the hearts is very close and very similar to the medicine of the bodies. He makes a comparison. And this is the secret of his saying to the Prophet saying to Abdullah bin Amr radiallahu ta'ala, very famous companion, when he asked him regarding fasting, he said, Sum yawman wa aftar yawman. He said, fast one day and don't fast the other day. He says, I can do greater than that. I can fast continuously throughout the year. But that is nothing superior to that. So the Prophet himself is saying, there's nothing superior to doing alternating your fasting. ولذلك لما قيل رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم, when he was said to the Prophet إن فلان صام الدهر, and such a person fasted an entire year continuously, قال لا صام ولا أفطر. He didn't fast, and nor did he do iftar. Yeah, he didn't fast, and he didn't eat to break his fast. So the Prophet didn't give much attention. He didn't really give much note. كما قال عائشة رضي الله تعالى عنها رجل كان يقرأ القرآن بحضر ربة. It's very similar to how Aisha رضي الله تعالى عنها, the wife of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, daughter Sayyidina Abu Bakr رضي الله تعالى عنها, one of the Mu'mineen, she said to a man who was reading the Quran in a mumbling fashion. He's reading really fast, not reading correctly. إن هذا ما قرأ القرآن ولا سكت. Indeed, this person has not recited the Quran, and nor has he remained silent. And she didn't take any note of it. So that's the highest level of fasting. But there's one type of fasting left, which is the mid-level, and that's what Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi says, that the mid-level of fasting is the mid-level of fasting is fasting for a quarter of the year. Yeah, fasting for a third of the year. Sorry, not a quarter. فهو أن تصوم ثلث الدهر, to fast a third of the year. How do you do that? So he says that this is done by fasting Mondays and Thursdays. So you fast on Mondays and Thursdays every week, which is the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You also include within that the month of Ramadan. Yeah. And then he calculates and he says if you do this, then it's roughly around 4 months and 4 days, which is roughly around a third of the year. Less. More Islamic year. Islamically?
Still more.
A little bit more. He says that, and this might be more than a third of the year, but then he goes on to the calculation. He says that if you take this figure and then you decrease it by the fasting, by not fasting on the days of Tashriq, you know, the 11th, 12th, and the 13th of Zulhijjah, when you're not supposed to fast, yeah? And then possibly the days of Eid, etc., then it comes around about a third, okay? And he says, and then he ends right at the end, he says, your fast should not be less than this amount. You shouldn't fast less than this, yeah? For indeed, it is easy on the self just to fast Ramadan, the 6 days of Shawwal, and every Monday and every Thursday. Yeah? And maybe throw in the 15th of Shaban, and also throw in Yawm al-Arafah. Yeah? Yawm al-Arafah. And if you fast like this, then he says at the end, your fast should not be less than this amount, for indeed it's easy on the self, and its reward is abundant. Its reward is abundant. So that's why Imam Ghazali, rahmatullah alayhi, when he mentions the amount of fasting you should do in a year. Then he moves on to the next section and he says, in terms of the secret or the spirituality of fasting, he also creates or mentions there are 3 levels. In this section, Imam Ghazali mentions the spiritual aspects of fasting. Perhaps we've become an ummah of ritual, possibly, without concern for the spiritual. That seems to be a common theme nowadays. This is a very important section, and this is probably the crux of the lecture today. Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi mentions 3 levels of spiritual fasting. So let's take some time to think about this. Where are we as individuals? We've only been Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. This is the 5th fast. We're already 5 days into it. We've got 24 days or 25 days left. Maybe we take some note of what's going to come on the next few pages, and inshallah try and inculcate that or bring that or introduce that into our lives over this Ramadan to make it a Ramadan, an actual meaningful Ramadan. Yeah? So I address myself before I address anyone else. Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi says that in terms of the spiritual aspect of fasting, there's 3 levels, and the first level or the lowest level is to abandon food, yeah, which we all do, without stopping one's limbs from carrying out evil deeds. For example, the tongue. Yeah? So you waddle the tongue all day, and you speak about this person, that person. Oh, you can't watch television in Ramadan. Yeah, but we can all sit together, having tea, and chat about other people, especially on the weekends. Yeah? It happens. Or the eyes, yeah, the heart, the mind. So you're stopping yourself from eating, but then you're not stopping yourself or your limbs from actually committing sins. So this is the fasting of the general people, Imam Ghazali rahmatullah said, the awam, the general people. And Imam Ghazali rahmatullah mentions they're content with the idea that they're fasting by name. I mean, sometimes you go into certain places and people's tempers are very on tenterhooks in Ramadan, simply because they're fasting and they're frustrated and they're ratty because they're hungry and they need that cigarette, or they need a cup of tea, or they need a coffee, or they might even need a bit of some fresh air from a vaping machine or something like that. Yeah. So Imam Ghazali mentions that this is the fasting of the general people. It's not ideal, and he explains this via hadith. I mean, there's a few other hadiths. He doesn't explain this, but I pulled this out from somewhere else. A very beautiful little risala known as Fadail Ramadan, the Virtues of Ramadan, by Sheikh Zakaria al-Kandalwi, rahmatullah alayh. And in there, Sheikh Zakaria al-Kandalwi, one of the greatest hadith scholars of the last century, our great grand Sheikh, and also somebody who's a prolific writer and a great Sufi Sheikh, which is an aspect of Sheikh Zakaria al-Kandalwi, rahmatullah alayh, otherwise known as a Sheikh rahmatullah alayhi. People don't know. So if you get a chance to read it, it's called Fadail Ramadan, the Virtues of Ramadan. Do grab a hold of it, read it. It's you might think it's quite ordinary, and then it's actually extraordinary, and it's a very special book. So you should read it throughout Ramadan. If you can do that, you probably grab all of everything I've said 10 times better in that particular kitab. Anyway, as a Shaykh rahmatullah alayhi, in his Fadail Ramadan, he mentions the hadith, رُبَّ الصَّائِمٍ لَيْسَ لَهُ مِنْ صِيَامِهِ إِلَّا الْجُوعُ وَرُبَّ قَائِمٍ لَيْسَ لَهُ مِنْ قِيَامِهِ إِلَّا السَّحَرُ. He mentions the hadith that there are many fasting people. From their fasting, they gain nothing except for hunger. It's hadith. وَرُبَّ قَائِمٍ, there's many people who spend the night in devotion, in prayer. لَيْسَ لَهُ مِنْ قِيَامِهِ إِلَّا السَّحَرُ. They don't get anything. They receive nothing from their staying awake at night, except for staying awake and tiredness. Yeah. So regarding the first hadith, he says that there are three interpretations according to the ulama of hadith. Number one, those who fast in the day and then for futur or iftar, they eat food that is haram. Yeah, so they fast during the day, but then they consume something that's haram. Yeah, this is one of the explanations. The reward is lost because of the greatest sin of eating haram, and nothing is gained except remaining hungry. And the second explanation is those who fast, but during the fasting they engaged in ghibat, backbiting. We had a lecture on this a few weeks ago where we talked about the tongue and the sins of the tongue. Ghibat, it's a terrible thing. But they fasted throughout the whole day, but then they indulge themselves in talking about this person and that person, and what this person did, what that person did. And the fact is, it's not benefited them in any way whatsoever. In fact, it's harmed the person in their spirituality. And then the third explanation is the one who fasted, but during his fast he did not stay away from evil and sins. Imam Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullah Alayhi, he then says that all three explanations are possible. It might not just be one, but all three things. And that's why a person should abstain from, try and bring some spirituality into one's fasting by not indulging in those type of sins. He also mentions another hadith where he says, Abu Ubaidah radiallahu ta'ala says, Sami'tu Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam yaqul, I heard Rasulullah say, As-sawmu junnah, that fasting is like a protective shield. Ma lam yakhrikha, as long as he doesn't violate it. As long as he doesn't violate it. The shield means that just as the man protects himself with a shield, yeah. Similarly, likewise, fasting protects him from Satan. In an hadith, it says that fasting saves one from punishment. In another hadith, from the fire of hell. And someone asked the Prophet what causes the fast to break, and he replied, lying and ghibah. Some scholars, in fact, say that lying and ghibah causes the fast to break. Yeah, just the way that if you eat or drink in Ramadan, your fast breaks. But the majority say that the fast is not done, but a person loses its blessings, the barakah. Yeah. So I've gone over the second level, the lowest level of fasting, which is the fasting of the general people, which is just remaining hungry, but then violating the sanctity of the fast by carrying out sins, which could be from the limbs, or from the heart, from the mind, etc. Then Imam Ghazali explains the mid-level of fasting. Yeah. So, in addition to the abstinence of food, yeah, the mid-level is to withhold the limbs from all evil actions. Safeguarding the tongue from ghibah, for example, the eyes from looking at the opposite gender, and likewise the rest of the limbs from carrying out any actions that are haram. This is the fast of the elite, or the khusus, or the khawas. Yeah? So that's the mid-level, which is quite self-explanatory. But then he also goes on to mention that the highest level of fasting is to guard the heart from thoughts and whisperings. So you're protecting your limbs, you're protecting your eyesight, your tongue, but you also protect your heart and your mind from all evil thoughts, wasawis. Instead, you focus the heart on the dhikr of Allah Almighty. So constantly throughout the day, instead of leaving your mind wandering and thinking about this and that, you're actually doing some sort of ibadah and dhikr. And dhikr is very easy. Salatu salam, durood, or sending salutations upon Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam through the day, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, keeping a tasbih in your hand, an electric tasbih, you can conceal very quickly. You just have that in your pocket, and you can make tasbih as you go along, etc. So Imam Ghazali calls this the fasting of the elite, the khusus of khusus. And this, he says, is the perfect type of fasting. So Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi, he mentions the three levels of fasting according to spirituality. The low level, the mid level, the high level. The low level is called the awam, which is abstaining from food and drink, but then kicking off, speaking about this person, getting angry, and all the rest of all the other sins. He says that they just stayed hungry, but they've not really gained anything spiritually. The mid level is to protect the limbs from all sins. Yeah, so you stay hungry, but at the same time you protect the limbs from all sins. And the highest level is, which is the most difficult, which is you fast, you protect the limbs, but then you also remain in dhikr and remembrance of Allah Almighty constantly throughout the day. And by doing this, you're closing the way, or the door opening up to the wasawis. Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi, then he concludes by saying that There is a seal, a khatima, by which fasting is made perfect. There is a seal by which fasting is made perfect. And he says two things. That is that the person makes iftar on halal food, which is very important. Not on doubtful food. Forget haram. He doesn't even mention haram. He mentions doubtful food. So you should only eat what's halal, not doubtful. He doesn't even mention haram, because it's not becoming of a Muslim to eat haram. And the second thing is he says, you avoid gluttony. So you remember the second lecture we did was about sharih al-ta'am, the overeating, excess eating, gluttony. So eating too much halal food, in that he makes up what he missed during the morning, and so he gathers between two meals at once. Yeah. So you eat so much you can't get up. And he says that when a person does this, when he eats too much, so you're fasting but at the same time you're eating too much, he says that it causes 5 things. Number 1, a person feels heavy, he can't get up. Yeah? He can't get up straight after futur. Forget about going to masjid and going to do the tarawih and all the rest of it. He just can't get up. He has to lie down. Number 2, he is actually strengthening or solidifying his carnal desires, his nafs. Yeah? So you're abstaining and there's an idea, you want to eat less, but he's stuffing himself and he's making his shahawat strong. Number 3, he negates the secret of fasting and its benefit. Number 4, it leads to laziness. He can't get up in the morning. You know, he struggles to get up for sahur. Yeah? Or tahajjud. He needs to pray tahajjud, he doesn't get up for this. And then he says, and he concludes saying that all of this is a loss. If he doesn't get any of this, it's a complete loss, and at times does not balance out the benefit of fasting. That's Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi's lecture. That's everything for today. But I thought I'd just add something else on, which might be useful to people. I'll quickly run through that. Shaykh al-Hadith once again rahmatullahi in his Fadail Ramadan, he mentions that the scholar mentions 6 things that a person should be mindful of when fasting. 6 things that a person should be mindful of when fasting. And there might be some repetition or overlap with what Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi has said. Why? Because as a Shaykh rahmatullahi, he also refers to Imam Ghazali in his writings. It's a very important book. It's digestible, soluble. Imam Ghazali, you can possibly say. His Fadail books. Fadail al-A'mal and Fadail al-Sadaqat. Definitely compulsory. So number 1, protecting the eyes. The glance is like an arrow from Satan. Whoever, out of fear of Allah, prevents himself from looking at evil, Allah shall grant him such light of faith, nur of faith, the taste and ecstasy of which will fill in the heart. That's number 1. Number 2, guard the tongue from lying, backbiting, ghibah, unnecessary conversation, swearing, arguments, etc. Should anyone pick an argument, the hadith says, then say, I am fasting. And that's fine. During the time of the Prophet ﷺ, 2 people were fasting, suffered hunger to such an extent that the fast became unbearable. The Prophet ﷺ, the companions came to the Prophet ﷺ, told him about it, he sent a bull to them and he asked them to vomit. Yeah, they vomited, and when they vomited, a piece of meat and fresh blood were found in it. The companions were surprised, and this was a miracle that took place in that physically they were able to see this. And the Prophet said they fasted with halal food from Allah, but partook of haram food by backbiting other people. You know? And that happened specifically on that occasion. Doesn't mean that if you backbite, then if you vomit, then things will come up. But it was a miracle, and that was physically manifested itself for people to see at that time. But it still stands. Number 3, the ears. Do not listen to anything forbidden. Yeah? Backbiting. Both the backbiter and the one who listens are equal partners in sin. Music. That music creates and breeds hypocrisy in the heart in the way that water causes plants and vegetation to grow. Yeah? And even that within that Islamic nasheeds, some of them probably border on the line of with musical instruments, etc. So you try and abstain. You know, I know some ulama say yes, and some others say no. They are the side of caution. And in fact, some of these guys are very nice. You know, Mahir Zain, he has versions without music, I think. And then some of the other guys also do the same. So, you know, just be a bit mindful and don't listen to the ones with music and listen to the other one if you want to listen to something. And then he also says, number 4, protect the rest of the body from sin. Hands should not touch, the feet should not walk, the stomach should be given halal, etc. And number 5, after fasting, it's advisable to not fill the stomach completely, even with halal. Don't eat too much. There's a bit of overlap there. And the 6th point is that after fasting, one should always have some sort of anxiety. Don't feel too good at fasting. I'm so great. 29 days, 30 days I fasted. Alhamdulillah. But there should be some anxiety in front of Allah Almighty. Will Allah Almighty give me acceptance? Because qubuliyah, acceptance is in the hands of Allah Almighty. What guarantee is there that Allah has accepted it? So you should have umeed or hope and raja and concern that Allah Almighty accepts our fast. So those are the 6 things. Protecting the eyes, guarding the tongue, guarding the ears, protecting the rest of the body from sin, and after fasting, not eating too much, and lastly, have hope in Allah Almighty that He accepts, but be a little bit anxious as well at the same time. And make dua at the time of futur that Allah Almighty gives me this. He also adds that the Quran commands, fasting has been prescribed for you. Kutiba alaykum siyam, which is the verse I mentioned at the beginning. And the commentators, the Mufassirin of the Quran say that this verse is from this verse deduced that fasting is made compulsory for every part of the body. How does that happen? Thus, fasting of the tongue means to avoid falsehood. Fasting of the ears means not listening to evil. Fasting of the eyes means not to look at any form of evil or sin. Likewise, fasting of the self means to be free from all carnal desires. And fasting of the heart means casting out the love of all worldly things from the heart. And fasting of the mind means avoiding thoughts about anything other than Allah. So that's the summary of Imam Ghazali's lesson on fasting. Mahfuz is very tired. In conclusion, I would just like to mention that we've gone over a few hadith right at the beginning where we mentioned fasting, we mentioned why fasting is special, 3 levels of fasting according to Imam Ghazali in terms of its amount, and we mentioned that the highest level is fasting one day, missing one day, fasting one day, missing one day. The lowest level is just to do Ramadan, but the mid-level which is recommended is to fast a third of the year. You can easily do that by fasting the Imam, for example, Mondays and the Thursdays and all the other days. And then we follow with the secrets of fasting. So you've got the fasting of the awam, which is just to stay hungry, committing all types of sins. The fasting of the special people, which is to not eat, but at the same time not carry out any sins. And then you've got the fasting of the elite, which is fasting, but at the same time not carrying out any sins. And then having the heart and the mind focused on Allah Almighty through the dhikr of Allah Almighty throughout the day, and that's the best type of fasting. I hope you find it useful. I hope you find this lecture useful. I pray that Allah Almighty gives me acceptance and enables us all to have a fantastic, spiritual, beneficial and useful Ramadan. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Any questions? Should you sleep after, if you're tired, you should go to sleep, yeah. It's fine, go to sleep. I mean, ideally you should stay awake till Ishraq and all the rest of it.
Scholars say it's not permissible.
No, I don't think it's not permissible, it's not recommended. But, you know, rather than staying in the masjid and having a chit chat with the guy next door, I think sometimes it's better just to go home and sleep. If you're tired. And if you're tired, you need to sleep, so sleep. Yeah, and it's a bit of a struggle in this country as well, because in winter time you can stay awake after Fajr. In summertime, when Fajr is at 4 o'clock, have you seen Fajr at 4 o'clock yet? No, it's your first year, isn't it? Yeah, so brother's all the way from Kashmir, and it's his first summer in the UK, I think, this year. So he's going to be in for a bit of a shock and a surprise. Isha will be at 11 o'clock, my friend. Yeah, and the Fajr will be at 4 o'clock. You're just lucky you didn't come 3-4 years ago when we were doing Ramadan in those days, because that was a struggle. So, you know, I think you need to go sleep after Fajr, inshallah. Yeah. Any other questions? Sister, yes? What resources? Say that again? What book is this? So, this is Kitab al-Arba'in fi Usul al-Din. This is Imam Ghazali rahmatullah's book. It's known as, you can even Turath, I think there's a translation, although at places I'm not happy with the translation. It was written in the 11th century by Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi. So he wrote a book called Ihya Ulumuddin, the Revival of the Islamic Sciences. It's in 10 volumes. It's an absolute fantastic book. But I would also recommend, sister, if you were to buy a translation and read it, then there are parts in there which might be a little bit difficult for our times. So it's a good idea to link in with somebody who's aware of it, and you can ask questions. But don't try and practice everything inside there. For example, food. We covered it last time. He does the amount of food you should eat is very little, he says, but you can't really implement that. So Ihya Ulumuddin, he wrote it, it's a very long book. I've got the whole set. It's about 9 volumes. It's about that big. Then Imam Ghazali, to make his book more readable and give more people access to it, he condensed it into a small volume. And this is the volume here, sister. It's called Al-Arba'in fi Usuluddin. So this is the entire book, but he's condensed it into a small volume. So he's removed a lot of things from there, and he's translated as the 40 Principles of Religion, I think, by Imam Ghazali. So that's the book. So that's the resources I used. And then did you attend the other lectures as well? Yeah, so the other lectures, what I used this. So today obviously I used Fadail Ramadan by Sheikh Zakaria Kandawi, which you can find online as a PDF somewhere. And the other lectures, sometimes just to summarize things, I've not really come across a commentary on this, but the same discussions on topics. I'm probably giving away too much here. Give ideas to people to run with my idea. But the other topics, I used a book called Khutbat al-Hakim al-Ummah, which is in 36 volumes by Hakim al-Ummah in Urdu. And so I just browsed the 36 volumes, finding little topics in there that related to the topic on here, and then used that. Why? Because some things he presented in a slightly different way, which is more digestible for people. And I found that really useful, so I actually used that. So these are the two books that I used. Does that answer your question, sister? Okay, exactly. Any other questions? Are you sighing because you don't want to ask the question, you're about to ask the question?
I'll ask it outside.
Okay, خلاص, that's fine. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله